the Pitch Change the Vibe. Welcome back to another episode of Chapter Z. And I'm Zani, your host today. Joining me are two very amazing guests. Hi! Aisha, a blogger who has 7,000 monthly views on her page, and Salma, a face behind Tales and Pages fantasy book talk that literally on every book lover's FYP. Welcome, please introduce yourself.
Wow, I wish I was as viral as you make it sound, Zenny. But hi everyone, super excited to be here. I'm Aisha, and yes, I do have a blog about social issues and literature.
And I'm so excited because I finally can talk about fantasy without being limited to 60 seconds. Hello everyone, I'm Salma and I post regular TikTok videos about fantasy books and also theories because I just love fantasy that much.
Perfect, and that is why everyone I invited two particular people because in today's episode we're going to talk all about fantasy. We'll be unpacking how fantasy has evolved over the last century and why it still keeps reader hooked until today. For beginning, one quick question. Why do you guys love books so much?
You want to answer that?
You can go first.
Okay. I think for me, because I've always loved imagining myself in a completely different world. So actually, I started my book talk just to talk about the plots I found interesting. But then I met people who cried over the same plots or even fell for the same characters. So eventually, what made me stay was the community itself.
I love that so much. I think for me personally, I've been fed books since I was a baby. For real though. And in that habit of reading, I realized that it trains you to think deeply. But people around me didn't really share that. I wrote about this in my blog a while ago. A study in Indonesia shows that whilst most people can read, they struggle to use what they read. So we have a low literacy rate, and that really worries me.
Yes, that's true. I mean, people can read, but they just don't want to.
Yes, that's true. The habit is to separate, right? But what do you think fantasy books have it worse since they are usually longer and denser?
Honestly, yeah. Fantasy books can be intimidating. Like when you open a book, you see a map, you see a glossary, 700 pages, you're like, no, not me. Yeah, but fantasy books on the other hand have very loyal fans. So I think it all depends on how it evolves, from high fantasy and classics to modern and contemporary fantasy.
Okay, you was mentioning about classic, right? Yeah. And speaking of classic, when you think of older fantasy literature, and what is your go-to?
I think for me, it's the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I know it's not exactly high fantasy like Tolkien, but the way Kafka writes feels so haunting. He takes something completely absurd like a guy turning into a cockroach, but then he writes it in such a calm tone that it almost feels normal. It's a classic style I love though, like slow pacing, simple words but with layers of meaning. I like it so much that I brought the book everywhere.
Wait, did you bring it today?
Let me see. I think. Oh yeah. I brought
Wow. Mine would be The Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh.
I've reread that numerous times. I think the classics that stand out to me are the ones with good concord and word choice, maybe even poetic ones. Right, Salma? I don't know, you added more to this. I know you know every school fantasy book in the school library by heart.
Okay, actually, this is getting exciting. In the early 90s, fantasy was closely tied to mythology and also fairy tales. Also, the language used was very authentic, of course, and stories like Peter Pan and the Wizard of Oz, they're whimsical but also simple like that.
Yeah, and I think it was in the mid-20th century when fantasy actually gained literary weight, like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia actually redefined that genre, and their works drew heavily from European mythology.
Yes, they were very Eurocentric, but later on, others started adding wit, satire, and even urban realism to fantasy. They went from idealized heroes toward more flawed human characters. So nowadays, fantasy became like a mirror of the real world.
Yeah, like urban fantasy.
Yes, exactly. Urban fantasy, like Percy Jackson, for example.
Man, I love Percy Jackson's books. You know, with all the Greek mythology and how the demigods disguise themselves as random strangers and Greek gods disguise themselves as teachers. I mean, fantasy these days is so relatable.
Yes, that's true. I absolutely feel that too because verses like Kazuo Ishiguro and Clara and the Sun, where the main character is an android, and or Erin Morgenstern with the Night Circus. There is a culture, science fiction, AI, and blends of romance too, or even social critic, right? And the language has become more cinematic and the pace is quicker. But have you guys read Rick Riordan's Penal novel, The Court of the Dead?
Yeah, duh.
I guess I have to catch up. Now moving on. But what do you think caused the shift between the years?
Because the audience has changed. Back then, fantasy was mostly for adults who wanted to escape from wars and depression, like how Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings right after World War I. But these days, it's mostly teens and young adults who enjoy fantasy. And if you didn't know already, our generation has short attention spans. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of signs and emojis, so of course the language had to keep up too.
Yes, that's true. As someone who runs BookTok, I think I really see it. I mean, if a book doesn't hook the readers on the first few pages, people just move on.
Yes, that's right. But do you guys think that is a good thing, or are we losing some of the elegance of older writing?
Maybe a bit, but language reflects society, right? I mean, the way we talk, the way we write, the way we think, it all evolves together. So if society becomes faster, then so does our storytelling. And naturally, fantasy stories will start sounding more diverse and fast-paced too.
Also, we are influenced by memes, TikTok trends, and even the way people from, different cultures mix English online. Plus, you cannot expect Gen Z to survive a 10-page plot about a mountain before the plot even starts.
Yes, that's true. I think Tolkien will not make it past today's algorithm, right? But what about the terms? Some audience think that mixing a real words and the magic words ruins the fantasy concept itself. But what do you guys think?
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, when authors put magic in environments we actually know, it makes the impossible feel possible. Like, it could happen to us. So, you see, modern fantasy gives readers space to talk about things that weren't discussed in older works, like race, gender, trauma. It's called adapting. So that's why stories like Harry Potter, Shadowhunters, Good Omens, that's why they hit so hard.
Yeah, also we're influenced by technology, with movies, fan art, and even video games. Readers can instantly imagine the scenes like in an actual movie. I mean, hey, my BookTok is proof that people still love fantasy literature.
Oh my god, good one, Salma. I admire your book though very, very much. But what an interesting talk we've had, guys. And even though the stories look totally different now, fantasy is still a big hit, right? Yes. And that is a wrap on today's episode of Chapter Z, guys. Thank you so much, Salma and Aisha. You guys, very, very amazing guests.
Thank you for having us. I always love geeking out about stories that, actually say something. And your podcast is just amazing.
And I'm just here making sure the internet never forgets good stories. I mean, someone's gotta keep the hype alive, right?
Yeah, that's true. So everyone listening, keep reading, keep imagining, and maybe put your phone down for a chapter or two. And make sure you stay tuned. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.